In a city of 8 million voices, Nancy Wilson had learned to disappear inside her room. It was a rhythm she knew by heart, the steady pulse of exhaustion that lived beneath her ribs, keeping time with the hiss of the espresso machine at Café Bora and the clatter of ceramic plates at Hanel House. 2 jobs, 7 days a week, with barely enough hours between shifts to sleep, let alone dream. At 24, Nancy had mastered the choreography of survival, smiling when required, translating documents during stolen moments on the subway, and pretending the hollow ache in her chest was just fatigue and nothing more. New York City had promised her everything when she first arrived from Accra 5 years ago, her mother's hand warm in hers, both of them carrying suitcases stuffed with hope and her mother's entire collection of K-drama DVDs. What started as mimicking drama dialogue became study. 2 years at Columbia before rent and reality forced her out. The city had delivered chaos instead, the kind that swallowed dreams whole and left behind only the bones of what could have been. She'd come to build a career as a cultural translator, to bridge worlds through language, to honor the Korean her mother had obsessed over during chemotherapy. Each episode a small rebellion against the cancer that was stealing her breath. Instead, Nancy found herself translating restaurant menus and business emails about kimchi export regulations, her fluency reduced to a commodity measured in words per hour and tips left on tables. Her mother had been gone 3 years now. The hospital debt remained, a ghost that haunted every paycheck. Tonight, like most nights, Nancy stood in the sleek minimalism of Hanel House, watching the dinner crowd with tired eyes. The restaurant was one of those upscale fusion concepts that had colonized Manhattan's Koreatown. All clean lines, Edison bulbs, and dishes that married West African spices with Korean technique in ways that somehow worked: jollof-spiced tteokbokki, suya-rubbed galbi, plantain kimchi that the chef, a second-generation Korean-American with a culinary degree from Paris, created as an homage to the neighborhood's changing face. It smelled like home and not home simultaneously, a scent that should have comforted Nancy but instead reminded her of everything she'd lost and everyone she could never be. She'd just finished pouring water for table 12 when the door opened, letting in a gust of October wind, and a man who seemed to carry the city's darkness on his shoulders without breaking stride. Nancy noticed him immediately, though she pretended not to. Everyone noticed him. It wasn't just his height, though at well over 6 feet, he commanded space, or the way his charcoal suit fit him like it had been designed with his body as the only blueprint. It was the way he moved through the restaurant, as if every room he entered rewrote its own rules around his presence. As if gravity itself bent slightly in his direction. Logan Kwan Park. She didn't know his name yet, but she would learn it soon enough, along with all the warnings that came attached to it like terms and conditions no one ever read. He sat at the corner table, the one reserved for people who didn't need to ask for anything because the world had already trained itself to anticipate their desires. His dark hair was cut close on the sides, longer on top, styled in that effortless way that probably required more time than Nancy spent on her entire appearance in a week. A thin gold chain caught the amber light at his throat, visible where his white shirt was unbuttoned just enough to suggest he'd never followed anyone's dress code but his own. His forearms, exposed where he'd rolled his sleeves to his elbows, were decorated with ink. Intricate geometric patterns that wrapped around muscle and tendon like secrets written in a language only he could read. Not the impulsive tattoos of youth, but the deliberate markings of a man who understood that some decisions were permanent and chose them anyway. Nancy felt something stir in her chest. A dangerous flutter of recognition she immediately crushed beneath the weight of practicality. Men like that were trouble. She'd seen enough of them in her years in the city to recognize the type. Too handsome, too composed, too accustomed to getting exactly what they wanted without ever having to raise their voice. The kind of man who probably thought power was a birthright and a woman's resistance was just an inconvenience to be managed. She approached his table with her server smile firmly in place. The one that was warm enough to earn tips but distant enough to discourage conversation. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up from his phone, and Nancy found herself caught in the crosshairs of the most unsettling gaze she'd encountered in years. His eyes were dark, not warm brown but something closer to black, in the restaurant's carefully curated lighting, and they assessed her with an intensity that felt physical, not leering. She would have known how to handle that. This was different. This was the look of someone who saw past the uniform and the rehearsed pleasantries, someone who recognized the exhaustion she worked so hard to hide. "Huayo 41, he said, his pronunciation flawless. "Neat. And I'll need a few minutes with the menu." Of course he would order the premium soju. Of course he would speak Korean like he'd been born with the language in his mouth. Nancy noted it on her pad without comment, her expression carefully neutral. He returned his attention to his phone, dismissing her with the casual ease of someone who had never had to consider whether his dismissals landed like small cuts. Nancy walked away, telling herself the heat in her cheeks was irritation and nothing more. She busied herself with other tables throughout the evening, but remained hyper-aware of him. He ordered the LA galbi with the chef's special gochujang glaze, ate with the focused attention of someone who appreciated good food but didn't need to perform gratitude, took 3 phone calls during dinner. All in Korean, too rapid for most of the staff to follow, but perfectly clear to Nancy, who caught fragments despite herself. Business talk? Something about a delayed shipment and a meeting moved to Thursday. The kind of conversation that sounded mundane but carried an undercurrent of steel. It was when she brought his green tea, served in the small ceramic cup tourists, always photographed, that everything shifted. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked, setting the cup down with practiced precision. "Actually, yes." He looked up at her, and this time his gaze lingered on her face with open curiosity. "You're Ghanaian, but you speak Korean. Not textbook Korean, real Korean. Where did you learn?" The question threw her completely off balance. It was too personal, too observant, too close to the raw parts of herself she kept carefully bandaged. "My family," she said, the response automatic and insufficient. "And you understood every word I said on my calls, didn't you?" He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from intimidating to devastating. "You were listening." Nancy felt her defenses snap into place like armor. "I was working, not listening. And even if I was, your business is none of mine." "Good." His smile widened, revealing something that might have been genuine amusement. "I prefer people who mind their own business. But I'm curious now. What brings a Ghanaian woman who speaks fluent Korean to an upscale fusion restaurant when you could probably be doing something far more interesting with your language skills?" The presumption in his question, the casual entitlement of it, sparked something hot and reckless in Nancy's chest. She'd been swallowing her pride and her opinions for so long, packaging herself into something palatable for customers and bosses who saw her as nothing more than a service to be consumed. And here was this man, this stranger in his expensive suit with his expensive liquor, making assumptions about her life like he had any right to an opinion. "Rent," she said flatly. "Bills, student debt, medical debt. The same things that bring most people to jobs they're overqualified for." She paused, her customer service smile back in place, though it felt brittle now. "Will that be all?" She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Not loud, but carrying a quality that made it impossible to ignore. "I didn't mean to offend you." "You didn't," Nancy lied, looking back at him. "Will there be anything else?" For a long moment he simply studied her, and Nancy had the deeply uncomfortable feeling that he was cataloging everything about her. The shadows beneath her eyes that no concealer could quite hide, the way her shoulders carried tension like a second skeleton, the slight tremor in her hands that came from too much coffee and not enough sleep, the defiance in her posture that said she was exhausted but not defeated. Then something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. "One more thing," he said quietly. He switched to Korean, his voice dropping lower. "당신은 보이지 않으려고 노력하지만 나는 당신을 봅니다. You try to be invisible, but I see you." Nancy's breath caught. Before she could stop herself, before exhaustion and frustration and 3 years of grief could be shoved back down where they belonged, she muttered under her breath in Korean. "오만한 개자식. 세상이 내 것인 줄 아나 봐. Arrogant bastard, thinks the world belongs to him." She'd said it quietly, barely above a whisper, meant only for herself, the way she always did, using Korean as her private language of rebellion, the armor her mother had given her against a world that constantly tried to diminish her. Logan's head turned slowly. His dark eyes found hers across the space between them. and his mouth curved into something that was half smile, half challenge. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Repeat that," he said softly, still in Korean, his voice carrying just enough to reach her ears alone. "This time, look at me." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, the gentle clink of chopsticks on porcelain, the murmur of conversation from other tables, the soft K-indie music playing through hidden speakers, faded into static. Nancy's heart hammered against her ribs, and for the first time in 3 years of perfecting invisibility, she felt completely, dangerously seen. Welcome back, my beautiful souls and kindred spirits. Before we start, go ahead and subscribe, like, and share where you're watching from. It always warms my heart to see our little storytelling family stretch across the world. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you give helps us keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. So find your quiet place, settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've never been before. She didn't repeat it. She couldn't. Her throat had gone dry, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling like paper in rain. Logan held her gaze for another moment, something flickering in his expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been something far more complicated. Then he placed his black card on the table without looking at the bill, stood with fluid grace, and buttoned his suit jacket with movements that suggested ritual. "Thank you for your service," he said in English, his tone perfectly courteous, perfectly professional. But his eyes held a promise that made her skin prickle with awareness. He walked out into the October night, followed by 2 men in dark suits Nancy hadn't even noticed entering, and left behind a tip that was generous but not ostentatious, not trying to buy anything. Just fair. Nancy cleared his table on autopilot, her hands steady through years of practice even as her mind raced. The ceramic cup still held the ghost of warmth. The napkin was folded with precise corners. Everything in order, everything controlled. Except her. It was past midnight when she finally clocked out, her feet screaming in her non-slip shoes, her lower back a symphony of dull ache. She waited for the night bus on the corner, coat pulled tight against the chill, her mind already spiraling toward tomorrow's freelance deadline, and the stack of medical bills waiting on her kitchen counter like patient predators. The street still hummed with that particular Manhattan energy that never quite died, even in the small hours. Somewhere a siren wailed. A group of drunk NYU students stumbled past, laughing. A taxi's horn punctured the night. Nancy didn't see Logan again that evening. But somehow, with that particular instinct that lived somewhere between intuition and dread, the same instinct that had made her mother stockpile K-drama DVDs like they were medicine, Nancy knew with absolute certainty that the man in the charcoal suit was going to become a problem. The question wasn't if. The question was what kind of problem, and whether she had any energy left to survive it. Nancy expected to be fired. She spent the entire next day waiting for the call from her manager, rehearsing apologies in her head, calculating how long her savings would last if she lost the restaurant job. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she stopped eating anything more expensive than instant ramen and gave up the luxury of heat in her apartment. The October chill would be bearable. She'd survived worse. The call never came. Instead, when she arrived home after her morning shift at Cafe Bora, her feet already aching, her back protesting the 5-hour sprint of espresso shots and pastry orders, she found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Thick cream paper, the kind that felt expensive against her fingertips. No postage, hand-delivered. Nancy stood in her narrow hallway, still wearing her coat, and stared at the envelope like it might contain a bomb. In a way, she supposed it did. Her name was written across the front in elegant script. Not Miss Wilson or Nancy Wilson, Tenant 4B, just Nancy. Like they were already intimate. Like he already owned a piece of her attention whether she'd given permission or not. She knew it was from him before she opened it. She could feel it. The weight of his attention, the gravity of whatever game he'd decided to play with her life. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, embossed with a logo she recognized from the sides of buildings downtown, Park Industries. And below it, just 3 lines. Private interview. Ninantras Park Industries Tower. Don't be late. No signature. No explanation. Just a command dressed up as an invitation. Nancy's first instinct was to burn it. Her second was to laugh at the audacity. Her third, the one that actually won, was to calculate exactly how much trouble she'd be in if she ignored a man who could apparently find out where she lived within 24 hours of meeting her. The answer was more trouble than she could afford. She went. Park Industries Tower was the kind of building that made people feel small by design. All glass and steel and soaring height, reflecting the morning sun like a declaration of dominance. Nancy stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, watching the parade of suits flowing in and out of the revolving doors. Men and women who moved with the confidence of people who'd never had to choose between electricity and groceries. She dressed carefully. The only professional outfit she owned. A white button-down shirt she'd bought at a thrift store in Queens, black slacks that were slightly too big in the waist, flats that pinched her toes but looked respectable. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun at the base of her neck, her makeup minimal. She looked like someone trying very hard to be taken seriously. Which she supposed she was. The lobby was a cathedral to capitalism, marble floors that echoed with every step, a security desk manned by guards who looked like they could break her in half without wrinkling their uniforms. A massive installation of twisted metal and glass hung from the ceiling. Art, probably, though it looked more like a warning. Nancy Wilson, she told the receptionist, her voice steadier than she felt. I have a 9 o'clock with. She paused, realizing she didn't actually know what to call him. Mr. Park? Logan? 53rd floor, the receptionist said smoothly, handing her a visitor badge before Nancy could finish the sentence. The elevator on your right. Someone will meet you. The elevator ride took less than a minute but felt like falling upward. Nancy watched the numbers climb, her stomach somewhere around the 30th floor while her body continued to the 53rd. The doors opened onto a hallway of muted elegance. Charcoal walls, recessed lighting, and abstract art that looked too expensive to belong anywhere near her tax bracket. A woman in a perfectly tailored suit was waiting. Asian, mid-30s, with the kind of professional smile that revealed nothing. Miss Wilson, this way, please. Nancy followed her down the hallway, past offices with glass walls where people worked in concentrated silence, past a conference room where a meeting was happening in what sounded like Mandarin. Everything was clean, ordered, controlled, the kind of space where chaos wasn't permitted to exist. The woman stopped at a door at the end of the hall. Solid wood, no window. She knocked once, opened it without waiting for an answer, and gestured for Nancy to enter. Good luck, she murmured, and there was something in her tone, sympathy, amusement, that made Nancy's pulse spike. The office was corner-facing, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a toy model. Expensive furniture arranged with careful precision, bookshelves lined with volumes in multiple languages, and behind a massive desk of dark wood and clean lines, sat Logan Kwan Park, looking every bit as dangerous as he had in the restaurant, but now in his natural habitat. He was wearing black today. Black suit, black shirt, the top button undone. The gold chain at his throat caught the morning light. His hair was styled back from his face, revealing the sharp architecture of his features. High cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, those dark eyes that seemed to see through every defense she'd ever built. Sit, he said, not looking up from the document he was reading. Nancy bristled at the command but sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. She kept her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral. She'd learned young how to disappear inside herself when necessary. How to be present in body but absent in every way that mattered. Logan finished whatever he was reading, signed something with a fountain pen that looked like it came with its own inheritance, and finally looked at her. That same assessing gaze that had pinned her in place at the restaurant. Except now there was no pretense of civility, no performance of customer service to hide behind. You came, he said. You didn't leave me much choice. There's always a choice. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. She didn't. You could have ignored the invitation, quit your job at the restaurant, disappeared into the 8 million other people in this city. And if I had, then I would have known you were smart. Self-preserving. His mouth curved slightly. Boring. Nancy felt something dangerous flare in her chest. I'm not here to entertain you. No, Logan agreed. You're here because you're curious. Because you spent all night wondering what I want. Because despite every instinct telling you to run, some part of you wants to know what happens next. He wasn't wrong. Nancy hated that he wasn't wrong. What do you want? She asked flatly. I want to hire you. I already have 2 jobs. I know. Cafe Bora, mornings. Hanel House, nights. You average 63 hours a week between them. You also take freelance translation work through an online platform, mostly legal documents and business correspondence, for which you're chronically underpaid. He paused. You make approximately $43,000 a year before taxes. After rent, utilities, student loan payments, and the minimum payments on your mother's medical debt, you have approximately $200 a month for everything else. Food, transportation, the occasional coffee you buy yourself and immediately feel guilty about. Nancy's blood went cold. How do you? I make it my business to know things. Logan's tone was matter-of-fact, neither apologetic nor proud, especially about people who interest me. I don't interest you, Nancy said, even though they both knew it was a lie. You don't know anything about me. I know you learned Korean from your mother. I know she died 3 years ago at Mount Sinai Hospital after a 14-month battle with stage 4 breast cancer. I know you dropped out of your graduate program at Columbia to take care of her. I know you're brilliant, fluent in English, Korean, and Twi, with reading comprehension in Mandarin and Japanese. I know you're exhausted, angry, and 1 bad month away from complete financial collapse. He leaned forward slightly. And I know that when you cursed me in Korean last night, you weren't thinking about consequences. You were thinking about truth. Nancy's throat felt tight. Hearing her life reduced to facts and figures, spoken in that calm, clinical tone, made her feel stripped bare, exposed, seen in a way that felt like violation. What do you want from me? She asked again, and this time her voice was barely above a whisper. Logan stood, moving around his desk with that predatory grace she remembered. He was tall. She'd noticed that before. But here, in this space, he controlled absolutely. He seemed to take up even more room. He perched on the edge of his desk, close enough that Nancy had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I need a translator, he said. Not for restaurant orders or business emails. I need someone who understands nuance, context. Someone who can read between the lines of intercepted communications and tell me not just what's being said but what's being meant. Intercepted communications, Nancy repeated slowly. You mean illegal wiretaps. I mean intelligence gathering. That's still illegal. Many things are illegal. Logan's smile was sharp. That doesn't make them wrong. Nancy should have walked out. Should have stood up, told him to delete whatever file he had on her, and disappeared back into her safe, small, suffocating life. Instead, she heard herself ask, what kind of communications? Korean primarily, Mandarin occasionally, messages between certain business associates of mine and certain individuals who would prefer to see my businesses fail. He paused. I'll be honest with you, Nancy. The work isn't legal, it isn't safe, and it will put you in proximity to people and situations that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Then why would I possibly say yes? Logan reached behind him, pulled a folder from his desk, and handed it to her. Open it. Nancy did. Inside were documents. Official hospital bills, collection notices, all bearing her mother's name and her signature as guarantor. The total at the bottom made her stomach drop. $173,000. The number that haunted her dreams and turned every paycheck into a reminder of how far she'd fallen. I'll clear it, Logan said simply. All of it, paid in full within 48 hours of you signing my contract. Nancy stared at the papers, at the impossible number, at the offering being laid before her like a poisoned apple. And what do I have to do? Work for me. 3 months, initially. Translate everything I need translated. Ask no questions about what happens with the information. Tell no one about the work. He watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Do that, and at the end of 3 months, you're free. Debt cleared, no strings attached. There are always strings. Not with me. Logan's voice dropped lower. I don't deal in manipulation, Nancy. I deal in transactions. You give me your skill, your time, your loyalty for 3 months. I give you your freedom back. Clean, Simple. Nothing about this man was clean or simple, but Nancy found herself considering it anyway. Found herself doing the math. 3 months, 12 weeks, 90 days of her life in exchange for eliminating the weight that had been crushing her since the day her mother closed her eyes for the last time. "I need to think about it," she said. "No, you don't." Logan stood, forcing Nancy to look up at him. "You've already decided. You decided the moment you walked through that door. Now you're just negotiating with your conscience. You don't know what I'm thinking." "Don't I?" He moved closer, until Nancy could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. "You're thinking that this is wrong, that taking money from a man like me will cost you something essential, that you'll lose some part of yourself you can't afford to lose." He paused. "But you're also thinking that you're already lost, that you've been drowning for 3 years and this is the first time anyone's offered you a rope, even if it's attached to an anchor." Nancy's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, wanted to prove that she was better than this, stronger than this, more principled than this. Instead, she heard herself whisper, in Korean, "당신은 악마예요." "You're a devil." Logan smiled. A real smile this time, reaching his eyes. "Better a devil you can negotiate with than an angel who'll let you drown." He straightened, returned to his side of the desk, and pulled out a contract. "You start Monday. 9 a.m. A car will pick you up at your apartment. I haven't agreed yet." "Yes," he said quietly. "You have." And he was right. Nancy took the pen he offered. Heavy, expensive, the kind of pen that felt like it carried weight, and signed her name at the bottom of the contract. The ink was black and bled slightly into the paper, making her signature look like a wound. When she stood to leave, Logan spoke again. "Nancy." She turned back. "You should stop cursing me in Korean," he said, his tone almost gentle. "Or I'll start thinking you like me." Nancy's cheeks heated. She left without responding, but she could feel his gaze following her all the way out the door. In the elevator, alone, she finally let herself shake. She'd just made a deal with the devil. She'd just sold 3 months of her life to a man who trafficked in secrets and power and probably violence. But for the first time in 3 years, Nancy Wilson could breathe, even if the air tasted like smoke. Logan Kwan Park's empire existed in the spaces between what was legal and what was possible. Nancy learned this within her first week. The office he'd provided for her was on the 52nd floor, 1 level below his own, close enough to summon her at will but far enough to maintain the illusion of separation. It was smaller than his but still more space than she'd ever had to herself. A desk of dark wood, 2 monitors, and a leather chair that looked too expensive to ever squeak. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, though Nancy kept the blinds closed. Something about being that high up, that visible, made her feel exposed. The work itself was exactly what he'd promised. Intercepted messages in Korean, occasionally Mandarin, sometimes coded, sometimes brutally direct. She translated them into English, noting context and subtext, highlighting phrases that seemed important. She never asked who the messages were from or what Logan did with her translations. That was the deal. Her skill in exchange for her ignorance. But ignorance was harder to maintain than she'd expected. The messages painted a picture. A network of businesses, restaurants, import companies, real estate holdings, that served as fronts for something larger. Money moving through channels that didn't quite add up. Negotiations conducted in euphemisms. Threats wrapped in politeness. And through it all, Logan's name, spoken with a mixture of respect and fear that made Nancy's skin prickle. She was translating for a criminal. She'd known that, theoretically. But knowing it and seeing it documented in careful Korean phrases were 2 different things. On Friday of her first week, Logan summoned her to his office. He was standing by the windows when she entered, his back to her, hands in his pockets. The late afternoon sun turned the glass into gold, and for a moment he was just a silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, still. "You've been avoiding me," he said without turning around. Nancy closed the door behind her. "I've been working. You've been leaving documents on my desk after hours, communicating through emails, disappearing before I can speak to you." Now he turned, and his expression was unreadable. "Why?" "Because that's the job. I translate." You do whatever it is you do with the translations. We don't need to interact beyond that. Is that what you think? Logan moved toward her, each step deliberate. That you can just float through these 3 months without ever actually seeing what you're part of? I'm not part of anything, Nancy said, even though they both knew it was a lie. I'm an employee, temporary. You're more than that. He stopped in front of her, close enough that Nancy had to resist the urge to step back. You're my eyes inside conversations I can't be part of. You're the one who tells me when someone's lying, when someone's afraid, when someone's about to make a move. That's not just translation, that's intelligence. I don't want to be your intelligence. But you are. His gaze held hers. And you're good at it. Better than I expected. Yesterday's translation, the message from the Incheon contact, you noted that his phrasing was off. That he used formal speech patterns he'd never used before. Nancy remembered. The message had been routine on the surface, confirming a shipment schedule, but something about the language had felt wrong, like someone was speaking through a script, hitting marks that weren't quite natural. You were right, Logan continued. He was compromised. Someone got to him. Because of your note, I was able to handle the situation before it became a problem. Handle it, Nancy repeated. What does that mean? It means the situation was resolved. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Logan's tone was firm but not unkind. This is what I meant about asking no questions. You do your work, I do mine. The less you know about the resolution, the better you sleep at night. But Nancy wasn't sleeping well. She hadn't slept well in years, and working for Logan had only made it worse. Because now when she closed her eyes, she saw the messages she'd translated, heard the voices behind the words, wondered what handling situations actually meant. I need to know something, she said quietly. The work you do. The business. Is anyone getting hurt? Logan was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file. He handed it to Nancy. Open it. She did. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, official documents. A community center in Koreatown, renovated and expanded. A scholarship program for immigrant children. Small business loans given to shop owners in neighborhoods where banks wouldn't touch them. Protection services for undocumented workers being exploited by employers. This is what I do, Logan said. The money I make from the less legal enterprises funds the things that matter, the things that help people who have no other help. I'm not a saint, Nancy. I've hurt people. I'll hurt people again. But I don't deal in certain things. No human trafficking, no drugs to kids, no exploitation of people who are already being ground down by this city. He took the file back. My operation exists in the gray. It's corrupt by definition, but it's not soulless. Nancy stared at him. This was supposed to be simple. He was supposed to be a clear villain, and she was supposed to be a desperate woman doing what she had to do to survive. But nothing about Logan Kwan Park was simple. Why are you showing me this? She asked. Because you're questioning whether you can live with this work. And I need you to understand what you're actually part of before you make a decision. I already made a decision. I signed the contract. Contracts can be broken. Logan returned the file to his desk. If you want out, tell me. I'll clear your mother's debt anyway. Consider it payment for the week you've already worked. Nancy's breath caught. Why would you do that? Because you didn't ask for this. You were backed into a corner and I offered you a way out. If that way's worse than the corner, I'm not going to trap you in it. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. I told you I don't deal in manipulation. I meant it. For the first time since meeting him, Nancy felt something shift. A crack in the wall she'd built between them. This man who could find out everything about her life in a day, who moved through the world like he owned it, who commanded people with a gesture. He was giving her a choice. A real one. I'm not leaving, Nancy heard herself say. But I need you to stop pretending we're not both aware of what this is. And what is it? You bought my compliance, not my approval. I'll do the work because I gave my word and because you're keeping yours. But don't expect me to like you for it. Logan's mouth curved into that dangerous smile. I don't need you to like me. I need you to be honest with me. And you just were. He moved back to the windows, a dismissal in the gesture. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'm introducing you to my inner circle. You'll need to meet the people whose messages you've been translating." Nancy's stomach tightened. "Is that necessary? You said you wanted to stop pretending. This is what that looks like." He glanced back at her. "Welcome to my world, Nancy Wilson. Try not to curse me too much while you're in it." That night, alone in her apartment, Nancy whispered into the darkness, "Chagaunangma," cold demon. But her voice carried no heat, only a strange, unsettling curiosity about the man who was both monster and mirror, who saw her completely and still offered her a way out. She didn't take it. And some part of her, the part that had been invisible for so long, wondered what that said about her. Monday morning arrived with rain, and the kind of gray October cold that seeped into bones. Nancy stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what one wore to meet a criminal organization's inner circle. She settled on black slacks, a deep burgundy blouse, and the only blazer she owned. Professional but not trying too hard. Forgettable but not invisible. The car that picked her up was black, expensive, and driven by a man who didn't speak. Nancy sat in the back, watching the city scroll past through tinted windows, and tried to calm the anxiety thrumming through her veins. Logan was waiting in his office when she arrived. He looked like he always did, impeccable in a navy suit, the gold chain at his throat catching light, his hair styled back from his face. But there was a tension in his shoulders that Nancy hadn't seen before, like he was bracing for something. "They know you're coming," he said without preamble. "They know what you do for me. Some of them won't like it, an outsider having access to their communications. But I've made it clear that you're under my protection. No one touches you. No one threatens you. No one even looks at you wrong." "How reassuring," Nancy said dryly. "I'm serious." Logan moved closer, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. "These men are dangerous. They've survived in this world by being paranoid and ruthless. You're an unknown variable. That makes you a threat. But you're my unknown variable, and I protect what's mine. I'm not yours. For the next 3 months you are." His gaze held hers. "Which means anyone who wants to hurt you has to go through me first. And no one in that room is stupid enough to try." Nancy wanted to argue, but something in his tone made her believe him. Made her feel, for just a moment, safe in the orbit of a man who dealt in violence. The conference room was on the 53rd floor, down a hallway Nancy had never been permitted to enter. 2 men stood outside the door. Security, clearly, both built like they could snap her spine without effort. They nodded at Logan and didn't even glance at Nancy. Inside, 5 men waited. Nancy cataloged them automatically, a survival instinct kicking in. The oldest sat at the head of the table, late 60s. Korean, gray haircut military short, wearing a suit that screamed old money. To his right, a younger man, maybe 40, Chinese, with glasses and the demeanor of an accountant. Across from him, 3 others. Korean, mid-30s, all wearing variations of expensive casual. One had tattoos crawling up his neck. Another had a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The third looked like he could have been a model if he'd chosen a different profession. They all stopped talking when Logan entered with Nancy at his side. "Gentlemen," Logan said, his voice carrying authority that made the temperature drop several degrees. "This is Nancy Wilson. She's handling translation and intelligence analysis for the next quarter. Anything you need interpreted, you go through her. Anything she flags as concerning, you treat as gospel." The old man at the head of the table studied Nancy with eyes that had seen too much. "You trust her judgment." "I trust her skill," Logan corrected. "And her discretion." "She's Ghanaian," the man with the neck tattoos said, his tone making it sound like an accusation. "Why would we trust someone with no stake in our community?" "Because she has no stake in our community," Logan replied. "She has no loyalty to anyone in this room except me. Which means she has no reason to lie, no agenda to protect. She tells me what the words say and what they mean. Nothing more, nothing less." "And if she decides to tell someone else what she's heard?" the accountant-looking man asked, his English barely accented. "She won't," Logan said with absolute certainty. "How do you know?" "Because I know what it takes to survive in this city with nothing, and Nancy's a survivor." Logan pulled out the chair to the old man's left and gestured for Nancy to sit. She did, feeling every eye on her. She understands that betraying me would be the last mistake she ever makes. It should have sounded like a threat. Instead, it sounded like a fact. Simple. Absolute. The old man leaned back in his chair. I am Park Sung-min, he said in Korean. And Nancy understood immediately. He was testing her. Logan's grandfather. I built this organization from nothing, turned it into something that provides for hundreds of families. He switched to English. You will hear things in this room that could destroy lives. Can you live with that weight? Nancy met his gaze. I've been living with weight for years, Mr. Park. This is just a different kind. Something flickered in the old man's eyes, almost like approval. Then welcome, Miss Wilson. Let's hope you're as competent as my grandson believes. The meeting that followed was brutal in its efficiency. They discussed territories, shipments, payments owed, and debts collected. They spoke in a mixture of English, Korean, and Mandarin, switching languages mid-sentence. When discussing anything particularly sensitive, Nancy listened, absorbed, translated when asked. She kept her face neutral, her voice steady, her hands still. The man they kept mentioning was named Vincent Choi, Logan's lieutenant, his second in command. He wasn't present at the meeting, and Nancy noticed the way the others tensed when his name came up, like he was a loaded gun sitting in the middle of the table. Vincent says the Incheon line is secure again, the man with the scar reported. The compromise was handled. How permanently? Logan asked. Permanently. Nancy's stomach turned, but she kept her expression blank. Handled. Permanently. She was learning the euphemisms. Learning the language of violence spoken in business tones. After 2 hours, Logan called the meeting to an end. The men filed out one by one, each giving Nancy a measuring look that felt like threat and assessment combined. Only Park Sung-min paused. You have my grandson's trust, he said in Korean, so quietly only Nancy and Logan could hear. Don't make him regret it. He's made that mistake before. Then he was gone, leaving Nancy alone with Logan in the too quiet conference room. You did well, Logan said. I sat there and said nothing. Exactly. You didn't flinch. Didn't show fear. Didn't ask questions that would have made you look weak or naive. He gathered the papers from the table, organized them with precise movements. They'll respect that. I don't want their respect. Then you want them to see you as prey. Logan looked at her directly. In this world, you're either predator or prey, Nancy. There's no middle ground. And prey doesn't survive. Nancy stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. What did your grandfather mean about a mistake? Logan's expression shuddered. Nothing that concerns you. Everything about you concerns me now. That's what you said. I'm part of this. For a long moment, Logan was silent. Then, I trusted the wrong person once. Let someone close who shouldn't have been. It cost people their lives. People I was supposed to protect. His jaw tightened. I don't make that mistake twice. Is that what I am? A calculated risk? You're a necessity who's becoming something more complicated. He moved toward the door, then paused. Vincent will be back from Seoul on Wednesday. You'll meet him then. He's going to test you, push you, try to find your weaknesses. Don't let him. Why would he do that? Because that's what Vincent does. He finds the cracks in people and exploits them. It's what makes him valuable. Logan's eyes met hers. And dangerous. Nancy left the tower that afternoon, with a headache building behind her eyes, and a weight in her chest that felt like premonition. She'd spent the meeting listening to men discuss violence like it was logistics, watching Logan command absolute respect through nothing but presence, feeling the undercurrents of power and threat that ran through every word. But it was the name, Vincent Choi, that stuck with her. The way the others had looked when they said it. The way Logan's expression had hardened. That night, Nancy dreamed of her mother. They were back in their old apartment in Accra, before America, before cancer, before everything fell apart. Her mother was teaching her Korean phrases from a drama they were watching, laughing at Nancy's terrible pronunciation. Why do you love these so much? Nancy asked in the dream. Her mother smiled. Because they teach you to see people's hearts, to understand what they mean beneath what they say. Language is never just language, Nancy. It's truth wearing different clothes. Nancy woke at 3 a.m., the dream still vivid, her mother's voice still echoing. She reached for her phone and pulled up the translations she'd done that week. Started reading through them again, this time not for content but for pattern. And there, buried in routine shipment confirmations and territory reports, she found it. A phrase that appeared 3 times across different messages from different sources. 백호는 썩었다. The white tiger is rotting. Nancy's Korean was fluent enough to know this wasn't literal. It was metaphor, code, and padfo. Baeko, the white tiger, was one of the 4 guardian beasts of Korean mythology. Protection, power, the West. She grabbed her laptop, started cross-referencing. Found references to the white tiger in older translations she'd done. It wasn't a person. It was Logan's organization, his empire. The name his grandfather had given it when he'd built it from nothing. 백호는 썩었다. The white tiger is rotting. Someone was saying Logan's empire was compromised, corrupted from within. And the messages were coming from inside his own network. Nancy sat in her dark apartment, staring at her screen, feeling cold spread through her body. Someone was betraying Logan. And based on the message patterns, whoever it was had access to his inner circle's communications. She should tell him. That was her job. Flag anything concerning. But something made her hesitate. If she was wrong, she'd look paranoid. If she was right, she'd be putting a target on her own back by proving she was too observant, too dangerous to keep around. Nancy closed her laptop and sat in the darkness, listening to the city hum outside her window. She'd signed up for 3 months of translation. Instead, she'd stumbled into a war zone. And the worst part, the part that made her hands shake and her pulse race, was that she cared. She cared about Logan walking into a trap, cared about the old man who'd built something to protect his community, cared about being the one who saw the danger coming and said nothing. Nancy Wilson had perfected the art of being invisible. But invisible people saw things others missed. And what she'd seen was a knife aimed at Logan's back, held by someone he trusted. The question was whether she'd warn him in time, and whether doing so would save his life or end hers. Vincent Choi arrived Wednesday morning like a storm wrapped in expensive tailoring. Nancy was at her desk, working through a new batch of intercepted messages, when her office door opened without a knock. She looked up, ready to tell whoever it was that basic courtesy included announcing yourself, and the words died in her throat. The man standing in her doorway was beautiful, in the way knives were beautiful. All clean lines and sharp edges and barely concealed danger. Korean, early 40s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him like second skin. His hair was styled in an undercut, the top long enough to fall across his forehead in a way that looked artlessly perfect. No visible tattoos, no jewelry except a watch that probably cost 6 figures. But it was his smile that made Nancy's instincts scream. Warm and friendly, and absolutely empty behind the eyes. "You must be Nancy," he said, his English carrying just the faintest soul accent, smooth as silk and twice as expensive. "I'm Vincent. Logan's told me so much about you." Nancy stood, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Choi." "Just Vincent, please." He stepped into her office without invitation, looking around with the assessing gaze of someone cataloging exits and weaknesses. "I wanted to meet the woman who has my partner so intrigued. You know, in all the years I've known Logan, I've never seen him hire someone so quickly. Usually he makes people prove themselves first. But you..." His smile widened. "You must be very special." "I'm very qualified," Nancy corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Vincent moved to her desk, glanced at the documents she'd been working on. Nancy resisted the urge to cover them. Korean and Mandarin fluency, cultural context, linguistic analysis. "Yes, you're certainly qualified. But Logan doesn't usually let qualified people this close to his operations." He looked at her directly. "Which makes me wonder what else you're offering." The insinuation was clear. Nancy felt anger spike hot in her chest. "I'm offering exactly what I was hired for. Nothing more." "Of course." Vincent raised his hands in mock surrender. "I meant no offense. I'm just protective of Logan. We've been friends since we were children. I've seen people try to use him, manipulate him, get close for the wrong reasons. It's my job to make sure that doesn't happen." "Then we want the same thing," Nancy said evenly. Because I have no interest in anything beyond my contract. 3 months, isn't it? And then you disappear back into whatever life you had before. Vincent picked up one of the translated documents from her desk, scanned it quickly. That must be difficult. Seeing all of this, being part of it, knowing you'll never really belong. I don't want to belong. Everyone wants to belong somewhere. He set the document down, his movements precise. Especially people who've spent their whole lives on the outside looking in. Immigrants, outsiders, people who exist in the spaces between cultures and never quite fit into either. Nancy's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me, don't I? Ghanaian immigrant raised between two worlds. Mother dead, father absent. Working yourself to exhaustion just to survive in a city that sees you as disposable. Vincent's smile never wavered. I know exactly what you are, Nancy. You're hungry, desperate, and Logan is offering you a way out. The question is what you'll do to keep it. I'll do my job, that's all. Vincent moved toward the door, then paused. You know, there's a phrase I've been seeing in some of our intercepts lately. Tuna nuntuda. I'm sure you've translated it. What do you think it means? Nancy's blood went cold, but she kept her expression neutral. It's metaphorical. Someone suggesting structural weakness in an organization. Which organization? I don't speculate beyond translation. How professional. Vincent's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement or might have been threat. You're smarter than I expected. That's good. Smart people survive longer. He opened the door. Welcome to the family, Nancy. I hope you last. Then he was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne and unspoken menace. Nancy sat back down, her hands shaking slightly. She pulled up her translations again, specifically the ones mentioning the white tiger. 3 messages, 3 different sources. But now that she looked more carefully, she noticed something she'd missed before. The phrasing was similar. Not identical, but close enough to suggest a single author using different accounts. And the timestamp patterns. Messages sent during sole business hours, when Logan's team would be asleep in New York. Someone was coordinating this. Someone who had access to multiple communication channels within the organization. Someone who knew enough about the operation to weaponize information. Someone like Vincent Choi. Nancy's door opened again, and this time it was Logan. He looked tense, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning her like he was checking for damage. Vincent found you, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What did he say? Nancy hesitated. If she told Logan about her suspicions now, with no proof beyond linguistic patterns and gut instinct, she'd look paranoid. Or worse, like she was trying to drive a wedge between Logan and his oldest friend. But if she said nothing and she was right, he wanted to know if I could be trusted, Nancy said carefully. He's protective of you. Vincent is protective of the organization. There's a difference. Logan closed the door behind him, moved to her desk. Did he threaten you? Not directly. But he made you uncomfortable. Everyone in your world makes me uncomfortable, Logan. That's not exactly news. Logan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Fair enough. He glanced at her computer screen. What are you working on? This was her moment. Nancy could show him the pattern she'd found, voice her suspicions, potentially save his life. Or she could stay silent, invisible, uninvolved. She thought of her mother. Of the K-dramas they'd watched together, where loyalty and betrayal were always tangled, where the truth was always more complicated than it seemed, where seeing people's hearts beneath their words was the only way to survive. Logan, Nancy said quietly, I need to show you something. She pulled up the translations, highlighted the phrase, showed him the pattern, explained her analysis, the timing, the phrasing consistency, the strategic positioning of the messages. Logan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. You're saying someone inside my organization is coordinating with external threats, he finally said. I'm saying the evidence suggests that possibility. And you think it's Vincent? I think whoever it is has access to high-level communications and knows your operation intimately enough to coordinate across multiple channels. Nancy met his gaze. Vincent fits that profile. So do 5 other people. Yes. But Vincent is also the one who just asked me specifically about that phrase, like he was testing whether I'd noticed it, whether I'd tell you. Logan turned away from her, stared out the window at the city below. The gray afternoon light made him look older, wearier. Vincent and I grew up together. His father worked for my grandfather. We survived this life side by side, made decisions together, built this together. If I accuse him of betrayal without absolute proof, you could destroy your oldest friendship, Nancy finished. I know. That's why I almost didn't tell you. Why did you? Because if I'm right and I said nothing, you'd be dead. And I'm apparently not ready to live with that on my conscience. Logan looked back at her, and something in his expression made Nancy's breath catch. It was vulnerability, raw and brief, but real. You barely know me. I know enough. Nancy stood, moved closer to him. I know you're trying to build something better than what you inherited. I know you protect people who have no one else to protect them. I know you gave me a choice when you could have just used me. She paused. And I know that if someone betrays you, you'll blame yourself for not seeing it coming. So I'm making sure you see it now. Logan reached out slowly, giving Nancy time to step back if she wanted. She didn't. His hand came to rest against her cheek, warm and calloused and surprisingly gentle. You were supposed to stay invisible, he murmured. I was, Nancy agreed. But you kept looking at me, and eventually I had to look back. The air between them felt electric. Nancy was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way Logan's thumb brushed along her cheekbone, of the way her pulse was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. This was dangerous. More dangerous than the work, than the organization, than any of it, because this feeling building between them, was the kind of thing that made people stupid, made them vulnerable, made them break their own rules and regret it later. Logan must have felt it too, because he dropped his hand and stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. I'll look into it, he said, quietly. Without Vincent knowing, if you're right. He stopped. If you're right, we have a problem that goes deeper than I thought. And if I'm wrong? Then you're paranoid and I'm grateful for it. Paranoid people survive longer in this world. He moved toward the door. Nancy. She turned. Thank you, he said quietly. For telling me. He paused. For caring enough to tell me. Then he was gone, leaving Nancy alone with her racing heart and the sinking realization that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd stopped being invisible, stopped being uninvolved, and somewhere in the process of translating Logan's world, she'd started caring about the man at its center. That night, Nancy worked late, cross-referencing every message she'd translated since starting, building a timeline, looking for patterns. Her eyes burned, her back ached, but she couldn't stop, because now she wasn't just surviving, she was protecting. And that changed everything. At midnight, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. You're clever. Logan chose better than I thought. But clever girls should be careful. This world eats them alive. V. Nancy stared at the message, her blood running cold. Vincent knew. He knew she'd figured it out, knew she'd told Logan, and he wasn't even pretending anymore. The war was no longer hypothetical. It was here. And Nancy Wilson, who'd spent 3 years perfecting invisibility, was standing right in the middle of it. The next 48 hours moved like a knife fight in slow motion, all watching and waiting and calculating distance between blade and flesh. Logan had Nancy moved to a secure apartment in Tribeca, 3 floors below his own penthouse. She'd protested until he'd shown her the security footage from her old building. Vincent's men, watching her door, logging her movements. The argument died in her throat. You were right, Logan had said, his voice tight with controlled rage. And now he knows you know, which makes you a target. So Nancy packed what little she owned into 2 suitcases and let Logan's security team escort her to a place with bulletproof glass and a panic room hidden behind a false wall. The apartment was beautiful in that sterile, expensive way. All modern furniture and abstract art, and a kitchen she'd never use. It felt like a very comfortable cage. She worked from there, translating under guard, watching Logan coordinate his response through encrypted messages and terse phone calls. He was building a case against Vincent, documenting every suspicious communication, every financial irregularity, every moment of betrayal written in ones and zeros. But documentation took time, and Vincent, it seemed, had run out of patience. It happened on a Thursday. Logan had a meeting in Queens. A sit-down with suppliers. Routine territory management. Nancy had begged him not to go, her instincts screaming danger, but Logan was stubborn. "I can't hide," he'd said. "The moment I show weakness, the entire organization fractures. Vincent is counting on that. Then take more security." "I'm taking enough." Nancy had watched him leave from her window. Her stomach knotted with dread. She'd tried to focus on work, on the new batch of translations waiting, but concentration was impossible. Instead, she found herself pulling up every message she'd flagged, looking for something she'd missed, some warning she should have seen, and there it was, buried in a shipping manifest from 3 days ago. A reference to a special delivery scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Coordinates that, when she mapped them, corresponded to the exact route Logan would take through Queens. Nancy's hands went numb. She called Logan. Voicemail. Called his driver. Voicemail. Called the security team leader. Voicemail. Vincent had planned this perfectly. Communications cut, the convoy isolated. Logan walking into a kill box without knowing it was closing. Nancy's mind raced. She had maybe 10 minutes before Logan's car reached the ambush point. Not enough time to reach him. Not enough time to get help there. But maybe. She pulled up the city's traffic management system, a back door she'd discovered while translating communications about route planning, logged in using credentials she absolutely shouldn't have had access to, found the intersection where the ambush would happen, and rerouted every traffic light within 6 blocks. It was chaos. Beautiful, life-saving chaos. Logan's convoy hit red lights at every intersection, forcing them to slow, to change routes, to take side streets away from the coordinates Vincent had marked. By the time Nancy's phone finally rang, Logan's name on the screen, she was shaking so hard she could barely answer. "What did you do?" His voice was rough, breathless. "My driver says every light in Queens just went haywire. Vincent was waiting for you. Ambush. The coordinates were in yesterday's shipping manifest. I just saw it. I'm sorry. I should have caught it sooner." "Nancy, breathe." Logan's command cut through her panic. Where was it? She gave him the intersection. Heard him relay it to his team. Heard the sharp curse that followed. "We just passed there 5 minutes ago, if we'd been on schedule." He stopped. "You saved my life. I almost got you killed. If I'd been faster, if I'd noticed." "You noticed in time. That's what matters." A pause, then quieter. "Where are you?" "The apartment. Where you told me to stay. I'm coming to you. Don't open the door for anyone but me." The line went dead. Nancy sat in the too-quiet apartment, adrenaline slowly draining from her system, leaving behind exhaustion and delayed shock. She'd just hacked a city's infrastructure. She'd just saved a crime lord's life. She'd just become something far more than a translator. She'd become complicit, essential, dangerous. When Logan arrived 20 minutes later, he wasn't alone. His security team swept the apartment first, checking for threats Nancy couldn't see. Then he entered, and Nancy felt something in her chest release at the sight of him. Alive, unhurt, real. He crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Nancy stiffened, surprised, then melted against him. He smelled like smoke and expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Adrenaline, maybe, or rage barely contained. His heart was pounding against her ear. His hands were tight on her back, like he was afraid she might disappear. "You're shaking," she whispered. "So are you." They stood like that for a long moment. 2 people who'd been pretending not to need anyone finally admitting the truth through touch. When Logan finally pulled back, his hands came up to frame Nancy's face, tilting her head so their eyes met. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you see what I missed?" "Because I wasn't looking at you when I translated. I was looking at the words, at the patterns, at the spaces between what was said." Nancy's voice was steadier now. "Vincent counted on you being distracted by the bigger picture, but I deal in details. It's all I have. It's everything." Logan's thumb brushed along her cheekbone, the gesture achingly gentle from a man capable of such violence. "You could have run. When you realized what was happening, you could have grabbed your passport and disappeared. No one would have blamed you. Yes, they would. I would have. Why didn't you? Nancy swallowed hard. The truth felt dangerous in her mouth, but she was so tired of hiding. Because you'd be dead if I did, and that would matter to me. Why? Logan's voice had gone rough. Why would it matter? You've known me for 3 weeks. I'm a criminal. I've hurt people. I've done things that should make you run screaming. I know. Nancy's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palms. But you also see me, really see me. And I haven't been seen in so long that I forgot what it felt like. She paused, gathering courage. Losing that, losing you, would matter. It already matters. Something shifted in Logan's expression. The careful control cracked, revealing raw hunger underneath. Nancy, don't, she interrupted. Don't tell me this is complicated or dangerous or wrong. I already know. I'm choosing it anyway. Logan's grip on her face tightened fractionally. If I kiss you right now, I won't be able to pretend this is just business anymore. Then stop pretending. He kissed her like a man who'd been drowning and just found air. Fierce and desperate and surprisingly tender all at once. Nancy's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, tasting smoke and danger and something that felt terrifyingly like home. Logan's fingers tangled in her hair, freed from its usual bun, falling in dark waves around her shoulders, and Nancy gasped against his mouth. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Nancy's lips felt swollen, her body humming with want, her carefully constructed walls completely demolished. You curse me, Logan whispered in Korean, his forehead resting against hers. But you keep saving me. Maybe that's the same thing, Nancy whispered back. They stayed like that, breathing each other's air, until Logan's phone rang, harsh and intrusive. He answered it without moving away from Nancy, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up. Vincent knows his ambush failed. He's disappeared. Logan's expression went hard, which means he's either running or planning something worse. What do we do? We? Logan pulled back slightly, studying her face. Nancy, you've done enough. More than enough. I can arrange protection, get you somewhere safe until this is over. No. Nancy's voice was firm. I'm not hiding while you walk into whatever he's planning next. I can help. You've already helped. You saved my life. And I'll do it again if I have to. She met his gaze steadily. You told me that in your world you're either predator or prey. I'm not prey anymore, Logan. So let me hunt. For a long moment, Logan just looked at her. This woman who'd been invisible for so long, now standing in front of him like a blade made visible. Then he smiled, dangerous and proud and utterly captivated. All right, he said. We hunt together. Nancy should have felt afraid. Should have been terrified of what she'd just committed to. Instead, she felt alive in a way she hadn't since before her mother died. Like she'd finally stopped just surviving and started actually living. Even if living meant walking into a war zone beside a man who dealt in darkness. Logan kept her close after that. She worked from his penthouse, translating in his study while he coordinated responses in the next room. They ate dinner together. Takeout from the Korean fusion place she used to work at, the owner too terrified to question why Logan Kwan Park wanted plantain kimchi delivered at midnight. They existed in a strange intimacy born from proximity and danger, and the kind of honesty that only comes when you've already seen each other's worst parts. And Nancy learned that Logan was funny in a dry, unexpected way. That he read poetry in Korean when he couldn't sleep. That his hands were gentle when they weren't being weapons. That he looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous in equal measure. 3 days after the ambush, Nancy was translating a new batch of intercepts when she saw it. A message from an unknown source, timestamped just an hour ago. The phrasing made her blood freeze. The white tiger bleeds tonight. She was running to Logan's office before she'd even consciously decided to move. He looked up from his desk, saw her face, and stood immediately. What is it? Nancy showed him the message. Watched his expression go cold and deadly. It's tonight, he said quietly. Whatever Vincent's planning, it's tonight. Where? Logan pulled up a calendar on his computer. There's a charity gala. Annual event all the major players attend. It's supposed to be neutral ground. No business, no violence. the perfect place for Vincent to make a move. You can't go. I have to go. If I don't show, it looks like fear. Like Vincent's already won. Logan came around the desk, took Nancy's hands in his. But you're staying here. With security. I'm coming with you. Nancy interrupted. Absolutely not. Logan, if Vincent is planning something public, he'll have people everywhere. People whose communications I've been translating for weeks. I can recognize them, identify threats before they become problems. She squeezed his hands. You need me there. I need you safe. Then keep me safe by keeping me close. Nancy stepped closer, her brown eyes fierce and determined, her full lips set in a line that said the argument was already over. I didn't save your life 3 days ago just to watch you walk into another ambush without backup. So either I come with you or I follow you on my own. Your choice. Logan stared at her. This woman who'd transformed from invisible waitress to essential partner in the span of weeks. And Nancy could see the exact moment he stopped fighting it. You stay within arm's reach at all times, he said. You see anything suspicious, you tell me immediately. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments, no heroics. Understood? Nancy nodded. Understood. And Nancy? Logan pulled her close, pressed his lips to her forehead. If something happens to you because I let you come, I'll never forgive myself. Then we'll make sure nothing happens. But as Nancy dressed for the gala that evening, a simple black dress Logan had bought her, elegant and understated, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, that Vincent was counting on Logan bringing her, that somehow she'd become the weapon being used against him. She just didn't know how yet. Endeavory 2. The gala was held in a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all exposed brick and modern art, and people wearing more money than Nancy had made in her entire life. She entered on Logan's arm, very aware of the eyes that tracked their movement, assessing, calculating, judging. Logan had dressed her to blend in, but Nancy still felt exposed. The black dress hugged her curves in a way that made her self-conscious, her natural hair styled in elegant twists that one of Logan's people had done. She wore minimal jewelry, just small diamond studs that Logan had presented to her without ceremony, saying only, "So you look like you belong." But Nancy didn't belong. And everyone in the room knew it. "You're beautiful," Logan murmured as they navigated through the crowd. "Stop looking like you're about to bolt. I'm scanning for threats. You're terrified. There's a difference." He guided her toward a quieter corner, his hand warm against the small of her back. "Nancy, look at me." She did. Logan's expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. "I meant what I said. You're beautiful. And every person in this room who's looking at you is wondering how I got so lucky." Nancy felt heat rise in her cheeks. "They're looking at me because I don't fit, because I'm not supposed to be here. You fit with me. That's all that matters." Before Nancy could respond, a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Logan, I was hoping you'd make it." They turned to find Vincent approaching, impeccable in a black tuxedo, his smile as empty and dangerous as ever. 2 men flanked him. Security clearly, though they wore suits instead of uniforms. "Vincent." Logan's voice was carefully neutral. "I'm surprised to see you here. Thought you were still in Seoul. Change of plans." Vincent's gaze slid to Nancy, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "And you brought your translator. How intimate." "Nancy is my guest," Logan said, his tone carrying a warning. "Of course. No offense intended." Vincent's smile widened. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious. What does one talk about with a translator at a social event? Verb conjugations? The subtleties of honorifics?" Nancy felt Logan tense beside her. Before he could respond, she spoke up, her voice calm and clear. "We talk about loyalty mostly. About how some people understand its value, and others see it as weakness to be exploited." Vincent's smile froze. "Interesting perspective. I've learned from observing." Nancy met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. Turns out treachery has a very specific linguistic pattern. Once you know what to look for, it's remarkably easy to spot. The temperature between them dropped 10 degrees. Vincent's security detail shifted, hands moving fractionally closer to concealed weapons. Logan's body was coiled tight beside Nancy, ready for violence. Careful, Vincent said softly. Clever girls who speak out of turn sometimes find themselves in unfortunate situations. Is that a threat? Logan's voice had gone deadly quiet. It's advice, from someone who's seen what happens when people forget their place. Nancy opened her mouth to respond, but Logan pulled her back slightly. We're done here. They moved away through the crowd, Logan's hand firm on Nancy's back. She could feel the tension radiating from him, barely controlled rage simmering just beneath his composed exterior. I'm sorry, Nancy whispered. I shouldn't have provoked him. Don't apologize for having a spine. Logan guided her toward the bar. But he's right about one thing. You need to be careful. He's looking for an excuse. They spent the next hour circulating, Logan making the required appearances while Nancy watched everything. She spotted 3 of Vincent's known associates in the crowd. Noticed the way certain people avoided Logan entirely. Felt the undercurrent of tension that said something was very wrong. At 10:30, Nancy excused herself to the restroom. Logan wanted to send security, but she convinced him it would draw too much attention. She promised to be quick. The bathroom was down a hallway away from the main event space. Quieter, dimmer. Nancy was washing her hands, reapplying lipstick she didn't usually wear, when the door opened behind her. In the mirror, she saw Vincent enter. Nancy spun, her heart rate spiking. This is the women's restroom. I know. Vincent locked the door behind him. I wanted a moment alone with you. Logan will. Logan is occupied. I made sure of it. Vincent leaned against the door, blocking her exit. I have to admit I underestimated you. Thought you were just a pretty distraction, a translator who'd take the money and keep her mouth shut. But you're much more interesting than that. Nancy's mind raced, calculating distances and exits. No windows, one door. Vincent blocking it. What do you want? I want you to deliver a message to Logan. Vincent pulled out his phone, tapped something, and Nancy heard it. Gunshots, distant but distinct, from the direction of the main hall. Tell him the white tiger is dead, and so is he. Nancy's blood went cold. What did you do? What I should have done weeks ago. Removed an obstacle. Vincent pocketed his phone. Logan's security is currently dealing with a situation that will keep them busy for the next 10 minutes. Long enough for my people to handle him. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, the entire power structure will have shifted. You're insane. I'm practical. Logan's gotten soft, weak. All his talk about honor and protection. It's made us vulnerable. I'm returning this organization to what it should be. Profitable, ruthless, uncompromising. He moved closer and Nancy pressed back against the sink. The translator thought she could speak power into existence, but words don't matter here. Only force. Nancy's fingers closed around the heavy soap dispenser on the counter. You're wrong. About what? Words are force. You just don't understand the language. She swung the dispenser at Vincent's head with everything she had. He dodged, but not fast enough. It caught him across the temple, sending him stumbling. Nancy ran for the door, unlocked it, burst into the hallway, and ran straight into Logan. He was alive, unhurt, and absolutely furious. Behind him, Nancy saw Vincent's security detail on the ground, unconscious or worse. Saw Logan's own men securing the hallway. Saw Park Sung-min, Logan's grandfather, watching with cold satisfaction. Nancy, Logan breathed, pulling her behind him. Are you hurt? No, but he said. The gunshots. A diversion. Logan's grandfather stepped forward, speaking in Korean. We knew Vincent would try something tonight, so we let him think his plan was working while we secured every exit, every escape route. Vincent emerged from the bathroom, blood trickling from his temple, his expression twisted with rage and disbelief. You knew. Of course I knew. Logan moved toward him, predatory and lethal. You think Nancy was the only one watching patterns? I've known you for 20 years, Vincent. I know how you think, how you plan, how you betray. He stopped, just out of arm's reach. The moment you touched her, you signed your death warrant. She made you weak. Vincent spat. Look at you. Planning your operation around protecting some translator you've known for a month. That's not strength. That's pathetic. No. Logan's voice dropped to something cold and final. She made me human. She reminded me what I'm actually fighting for. And that makes me more dangerous than you ever were. What happened next happened fast. Vincent lunging, Logan moving like water, the fight brutal and personal in a way that transcended technique. Nancy wanted to look away but couldn't. This was Logan without restraint, without mercy. It ended with Vincent on the floor, Logan's hand around his throat, the promise of death written in every line of his body. Logan. Nancy's voice cut through the violence. Don't. He looked back at her, something wild in his eyes. Don't kill him. Not like this. Not for me. He threatened you. He would have. I know. Nancy moved closer, her hand finding Logan's shoulder. But you told me you're trying to build something better. This isn't it. This is what he wanted. For you to become exactly like him. For a terrible moment, Nancy thought Logan would do it anyway. Would squeeze until Vincent stopped breathing and damn the consequences. Then his hand loosened. He stood, stepped back, left Vincent gasping on the floor. Get him out of here, Logan told his security team. I don't care where. Just make sure I never see him again. They dragged Vincent away, still breathing but defeated, destroyed not by death but by exile. Exactly what Nancy had suggested weeks ago as the worst possible fate. Park Sung-min approached Nancy, studied her with those ancient eyes. You've changed my grandson, made him remember there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. He spoke in Korean, each word deliberate. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Nancy replied in the same language. The old man laughed. Sometimes they're the same thing. Logan pulled Nancy into his arms then, not caring who was watching. Buried his face in her hair and just held her, his body shaking with adrenaline crash and delayed fear. I thought, when I heard you were alone with him. His voice was rough, breaking. I'm okay. We're okay. Nancy. God, Nancy. She felt him trembling against her. This man who commanded an empire, reduced to relief and terror in equal measure. Nancy wrapped her arms around him, grounding him, letting him feel her solid and alive and real. Take me home, she whispered. Logan lifted his head, his dark eyes searching hers, understanding exactly what she was asking for, what she was offering. Yes, he breathed. They left the gala, leaving others to clean up the aftermath. In the car, Logan kept Nancy's hand in his, thumb stroking across her knuckles like he needed the tactile reassurance that she was still there. When they reached his penthouse, Logan poured them both whiskey neither of them drank. They stood in his living room, the city glittering beyond the windows, the space between them humming with everything unspoken. I almost lost you tonight, Logan said finally. But you didn't. I could have. If Vincent had been faster, if you hadn't fought back, if... Nancy closed the distance between them, silencing him with a kiss. It was different from before, slower, deeper, carrying the weight of everything they'd survived. Logan's hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent and desperate at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nancy whispered, I'm here. I'm alive. We both are. Nancy, don't think. Not tonight. She took his hand, started leading him toward the bedroom. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. Tonight, just be with me. Logan let her lead him. This woman who'd cursed him in Korean and saved his life and become essential without either of them meaning for it to happen. And as the door closed behind them, Nancy Wilson finally stopped running from what she wanted. She let herself be seen, completely. And Logan looked at her like she was everything. Nancy woke to white walls and the steady beep of medical equipment and pain radiating from her left side. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why everything hurt. Then it came rushing back, not the gala, not Vincent, but after. 3 days after, when she'd finally started to relax. Started to believe the danger had passed. The infection had come from nowhere. Or rather, from the small cut on her hand she'd gotten during the bathroom fight with Vincent. Something she'd barely noticed, just cleaned and bandaged herself. But apparently soap dispensers carried more than soap. Bacteria, rust, something that had entered her bloodstream and decided to wage war. By the time Logan had found her collapsed in his penthouse bathroom, her fever had been climbing toward dangerous. She remembered fragments, his face, terrified in a way she'd never seen. The ride to the hospital. Voices talking about sepsis and antibiotics and hoping they'd caught it in time. Then nothing until now. Nancy turned her head slowly, the movement making her vision swim. Logan was there, asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers even in unconsciousness. He looked terrible, unshaven, hair disheveled. His usually impeccable suit rumpled and creased like he'd been wearing it for days. "You look awful," Nancy croaked, her voice rough from disuse. Logan's eyes snapped open immediately. For a moment he just stared at her, like he couldn't quite believe she was awake. Then he was moving, leaning over her, his free hand coming up to touch her face with aching gentleness. "You're awake," he breathed. "Thank God you're awake." "How long?" 3 days. You crashed twice. The doctors." His voice broke. "They weren't sure you'd wake up." Nancy processed this slowly. 3 days. She'd lost 3 days. "You stayed." It wasn't a question. "Of course I stayed." Logan's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, tracing the hollow exhaustion had carved there. "Where else would I be? Running your empire, handling the fallout from Vincent, living your life." "My life is here," he said it simply, like it was obvious. "I haven't left this room except when they forced me to. Haven't slept more than an hour at a time. I just kept thinking." He stopped, swallowed hard. "If you died because of me, because of my world, because I brought you into this, Logan." Nancy squeezed his hand as hard as her weakened grip would allow. "This isn't your fault." "Of course it is. You got hurt fighting Vincent because I brought you to that gala. You got infected because I didn't make sure you had proper medical attention immediately. You almost died because I was selfish enough to let you stay in my life when I knew how dangerous it was." Nancy saw it then. The guilt eating at him. The self-recrimination that had probably been building for 3 days while she lay unconscious. Logan Quan Park, who commanded respect through fear and competence, blaming himself for something neither of them could have predicted. "Come here," she whispered. Logan leaned closer, and Nancy lifted her free hand, the one without the IV, to touch his face. His skin was rough with stubble, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and worry. "I chose this," Nancy said quietly. "I chose to go to the gala, chose to fight Vincent, chose to stay with you even knowing the risks. You didn't force me into anything. I should have protected you better. You can't protect me from everything, and I wouldn't want you to." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "For 3 years after my mother died, I was just surviving, going through the motions, doing what I had to do, never actually living. Then I met you, and suddenly I was alive again, terrified and exhilarated and feeling things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "So yes, your world is dangerous, but it's also made me remember what it's like to matter, to be seen, to care about someone enough that losing them would hurt worse than anything." Logan's expression cracked open, revealing raw emotion underneath. "Nancy, I'm not finished." She managed a weak smile. "You told me once that I cursed you in Korean, but you had it backwards. You cursed me, Logan. You made me visible when I'd perfected invisibility. You made me care when I'd gotten so good at not caring. You made me want a future when I'd stopped believing I deserved one." "You deserve everything," Logan said fiercely. "You deserve safety and peace and a life that doesn't involve hospital visits and near-death experiences. Maybe. But that's not the life I want." Nancy's eyes held his. "I want this. You. Even with all the complications and dangers and impossibility of it. I want you." Logan kissed her then, carefully, mindfully of her injuries and exhaustion, but with an intensity that made Nancy's heart rate spike on the monitor. When he pulled back, he stayed close, his forehead resting against hers. "When you heal," he whispered in Korean, "I'll rebuild everything clean. For you, for us. No more gray areas, no more dangerous business. I'll make it all legitimate." "Don't," Nancy whispered back. "Don't rebuild yourself for me. Rebuild yourself for you. Because you want to be better. Not because you think you have to be perfect to deserve this." Logan pulled back slightly, studying her face. "How are you this wise while recovering from sepsis?" "My mother used to say that fever dreams show you the truth." Nancy's smile turned sad. "I dreamed about her. She told me that I was allowed to be happy. That survival isn't the same as living." She was right. She usually was. Nancy's eyes were starting to drift closed again, exhaustion pulling at her. "Logan? I'm here. Don't leave. Never." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. "I'll be right here when you wake up." Nancy let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that she'd finally found someone who saw her completely, her strength and her vulnerability, her courage and her fear, and chose her anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, Nancy healed. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. Logan visited every day, brought her Korean food from her favorite restaurant, read to her in Korean when she was too tired to focus on anything else. Park Sung-min came once, studied her with those assessing eyes, and pronounced her tough enough to survive this family. The nurses gossiped about the handsome man who never left her side unless absolutely necessary, about the expensive flowers that arrived daily, about the way he looked at her like she was something infinitely precious. And Nancy, who'd spent so long being invisible, let herself be seen, let herself be cared for, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she belonged. When she was finally cleared to leave the hospital, Logan took her not to the Tribeca apartment or his penthouse, but somewhere new, a brownstone in Brooklyn, renovated and beautiful, with a garden in the back and windows that let in natural light. "What is this?" Nancy asked as they stood in the empty living room. "Ours," Logan said simply. "If you want it. Somewhere that's not about my work or my world. Somewhere that's just us." Nancy turned to look at him. This man who'd started as a threat and become her salvation, who'd given her back her life and then offered to build a new one together. "Yes," she whispered. "I want it." Logan pulled her close, careful of her still healing body, and Nancy rested her head against his chest, listened to his heartbeat, felt safe in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "I love you," Logan murmured into her hair. "I probably shouldn't. It's too soon, too complicated, too everything. But I do." Nancy pulled back to look at him, her brown eyes bright with emotion. "I love you too. Even though you're infuriating and dangerous and probably going to give me a heart attack one day." "Only one?" She laughed, and he kissed her, and for the first time in years, Nancy Wilson felt like she was home. Not in a place. In a person. 6 months later, Nancy stood in front of her graduate school cohort and presented her thesis on linguistic patterns in multilingual code switching among immigrant communities. She wore professional attire, spoke with confidence earned through survival, and felt Logan's presence in the back row like a physical warmth. After Vincent's exile, Logan had systematically restructured his entire operation. Legitimate businesses now. Import, export companies that actually traded legal goods, real estate investments that provided affordable housing in immigrant neighborhoods, cultural centers that offered language classes and job training. The gray had shifted toward light, slowly but steadily. It wasn't perfect. Logan still dealt with people who operated outside the law, still had to make hard decisions that kept Nancy awake some nights. But the worst of it, the violence, the exploitation, the cruelty, was gone. Replaced by something that looked almost like a regular business empire. Almost. Nancy had gone back to school, using the money Logan had paid her. She'd insisted on keeping it, refusing to let him erase the terms of their original deal. She still translated for him sometimes, but now it was for real negotiations, cultural consultations, legitimate work. She'd become his partner in more than just name, advising on community outreach, connecting with immigrant business owners, helping build the kind of empire that actually helped people, instead of just extracting from them. After her presentation, after the applause and the congratulations from professors who'd once dismissed her as just another dropout returning too late, Nancy found Logan waiting outside the building. He was leaning against his car, a sleek black sedan that was expensive but not ostentatious, wearing a navy suit that made him look like any other successful businessman. Except for his eyes. Those dark, dangerous eyes that saw everything. "You were brilliant," he said as she approached. "You're biased. I'm honest." He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Dr. Martinez looked ready to offer you a teaching position on the spot. She did, actually, starting next fall if I want it." Logan pulled back to look at her. "And do you?" Nancy considered. 6 months ago, she would have said yes immediately, grabbed any lifeline back to the academic world she'd been forced to abandon. But now, having built something new, something unexpected, she wasn't sure anymore. I don't know, she admitted. I like what we're doing. The cultural center, the community work, feels more real than teaching theory to grad students who've never had to choose between rent and food. You could do both. Maybe. Nancy smiled up at him. But that's a conversation for later. Today is about celebrating. Then let's celebrate. Logan opened the car door for her. I have something to show you. They drove through Brooklyn, past the brownstone they now shared, past the neighborhoods where Logan's businesses operated, until they reached a building Nancy didn't recognize. It was old, beautiful. A converted warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick. What is this? Nancy asked as Logan helped her out of the car. You'll see. He led her inside, through a lobby that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, up an elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, Nancy gasped. The rooftop had been transformed into a garden. Not manicured, formal perfection, but something wild and alive. Plants from different continents growing together. Korean hibiscus blooming alongside Ghanaian orchids, cherry blossoms mixing with African violets. String lights hung overhead, casting warm light across everything. A small table was set in the center, food already waiting. But it was the people that made Nancy's breath catch. Park Sung-min stood near the railing, dignified in his gray suit. Maria from the restaurant, grinning like she'd been in on a secret. A few of Logan's core team members. The ones who'd proven their loyalty during Vincent's coup. Even Dr. Martinez from Nancy's program, looking pleased and knowing. Logan, Nancy whispered. What is this? A beginning, he said quietly. He took her hand, led her to the center of the garden, and the crowd parted around them. 6 months ago, you cursed me in Korean, called me an arrogant bastard who thought the world belonged to him. I remember, Nancy said, her heart starting to race. You were right. I did think that. I thought power meant control, that strength meant never showing vulnerability, that the only way to survive was to make sure everyone feared you more than they loved you. Logan's hands were shaking slightly as he held hers. Then you showed me something different. You showed me that real strength is letting yourself be seen. That real power is building something worth protecting, instead of just protecting what you've taken. That the only way to actually live is to let someone else matter more than your own survival. Nancy felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes. You saved my life, Logan continued, switching to Korean now, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. Not just from Vincent's ambush or his betrayal. You saved me from becoming exactly what I was trying to avoid. A man so afraid of weakness that he forgot how to be human. He released one of her hands, reached into his pocket. Nancy Wilson, you came to America to disappear, but you made me see you. And once I saw you, I couldn't look away. He dropped to one knee. Nancy's breath stopped. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent. Even the city noise seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them in this impossible garden, suspended between what was and what could be. Logan pulled out a ring. Simple, elegant, a single stone that caught the string lights and threw rainbow fractals across his hands. 당신은 나를 저주했고 나는 너에게 구원받았어, he said softly. You cursed me, and I was saved by you. 내 전부가 되어줄래? Will you become my everything? Nancy stood there, looking down at this man who'd started as a threat and become her home. This man who'd seen her at her most exhausted, most defiant, most vulnerable, and chosen her anyway. This man who was offering her not just a ring, but a future neither of them had believed possible. She thought about her mother, who'd taught her to see people's hearts through language, who'd shown her that sometimes the most important things were spoken in the spaces between words, who'd told her, in that fever, dream, or vision, or whatever it was, that she was allowed to be happy. Nancy thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago. Invisible, exhausted, drowning in debt and grief and the crushing weight of just surviving. And she thought about who she'd become. Visible, powerful, alive in ways that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The answer was obvious. had been obvious since the night he'd caught her curse and demanded she repeat it to his face. "정말 미친 놈," Nancy whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You absolute madman." Logan's expression cracked into genuine joy, hope and fear and love all tangled together. "Yes," Nancy said louder now in English so everyone could hear. "Yes, to all of it. To you, to us, to this impossible, beautiful, terrifying future we're building together. Yes." Logan stood, slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like he'd somehow known exactly what size she needed, and kissed her. Not gently, not carefully, but with all the passion and relief and desperate love they'd both been carrying. Nancy kissed him back, her hands fisting in his suit jacket, pulling him closer, tasting joy and salt from the tears streaming down her face. Around them, people cheered. Park Sung-min said something approving in Korean. Maria was crying openly. Dr. Martinez was smiling like she'd known this would happen all along. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Logan kept Nancy close. His forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling, their hearts beating in sync. "I love you," he murmured. "Every stubborn, brilliant, courageous part of you." "I love you too," Nancy whispered back. "Even the parts that are probably going to give me gray hair before I'm 30. Logan laughed, that rare, genuine sound that Nancy had learned to treasure, and kissed her again. Softer this time, sweeter, carrying the weight of promises made and futures claimed. They stayed on that rooftop for hours. Ate food that mixed Korean and Ghanaian flavors in ways that shouldn't have worked but did. Listened to Park Sung-min tell stories about Logan as a child, about the grandmother who'd raised him to believe in honor. Heard Maria recount the night Nancy had cursed Logan in the restaurant, how the whole staff had held their breath waiting for his response. "I knew then," Maria said, laughing. "I saw the way he looked at you after, and I knew. That man was ruined." "I was," Logan agreed, his arm around Nancy's waist, holding her close. "Completely." As the night deepened and people began to leave, Nancy and Logan stood at the railing, looking out over the city that had brought them together. The lights glittered like promises. Some kept, some broken, all of them part of the endless negotiation between hope and reality that was living in New York. "Are you scared?" Logan asked quietly. Nancy considered. "Terrified. Marriage to a former crime lord with enemies and complicated family dynamics and a past that's always going to be there. What could possibly go wrong? Everything." "Exactly." She leaned into him, feeling his warmth against her back, his arms coming around her. "But I'd rather have everything with you. The good, the bad, the terrifying, than safe and lonely without you." "Nancy Wilson," Logan murmured into her hair. "How did I get so lucky?" "You didn't. You earned it. By changing, growing, becoming someone who deserved to be loved instead of just feared." She turned in his arms to face him. "And by being stubborn enough to keep looking at me until I couldn't stay invisible anymore." They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, letting the city hum around them. Eventually, Logan drove them home, to their brownstone with its garden, and its light, and its promise of ordinary domesticity wrapped around extraordinary love. 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at the cultural center Logan had built. Nancy wore white, a simple dress that her mother would have loved, and walked down an aisle lined with Korean hibiscus and Ghanaian orchids. Logan cried when he saw her, not bothering to hide it, and Nancy felt her own tears flow freely. Park Sung-min officiated, speaking in Korean and English about the binding of 2 lives, 2 cultures, 2 people who'd found each other in the chaos of a city designed to keep people apart, about how love wasn't about perfection but about choosing each other daily, through struggle and joy and everything in between. When it came time for vows, Nancy spoke in Korean, her voice steady and clear. "I promise to keep cursing you when you're being impossible, to call you out when you're wrong, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to be your partner, your equal, your home, and to never ever go back to being invisible. You made me seen, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you feel just as seen." Logan's vows were simpler, delivered in English with his eyes locked on Nancy's. "I promise to deserve you, every single day, to build a life worthy of the woman who saved mine, to protect without caging, to lead without controlling, to love without conditions. You showed me how to be human again." I'm going to spend forever trying to show you what that means." They sealed their promises with a kiss that felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. The reception was chaos in the best way. Korean food and Ghanaian dishes side by side. Music that mixed genres and cultures. People dancing who'd never danced together before. Nancy's father appeared. Flown in from Ghana as a surprise Logan had arranged, and wept while holding his daughter. Park Sung-min got drunk on soju and told increasingly inappropriate stories about Logan's teenage years. Maria caught the bouquet and immediately tried to give it back, saying she was too old for that nonsense. And through it all, Logan kept Nancy's hand in his. Like he was still afraid she might disappear. Like he couldn't quite believe she was real. That night, alone in their brownstone, Nancy stood in the bedroom they'd made theirs. Decorated with pieces of both their cultures, filled with books in multiple languages, smelling of the jasmine incense Logan liked and the shea butter Nancy used, and felt complete in a way she'd never expected to feel again. Logan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, pressed his lips to her shoulder. "What are you thinking? That 6 months ago I was invisible, and now I'm someone's wife. It's surreal. You were never invisible. I saw you from the first moment. You saw someone to use. There's a difference." "Maybe at first," Logan admitted. "But that changed fast. You changed me fast." Nancy turned in his arms, looked up at this man who was now her husband. This beautiful, dangerous, surprisingly tender man who'd given her back her life, and then offered to build a new one together. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you more. That's not how this works." "Isn't it?" Logan smiled, that devastating smile that still made Nancy's pulse race. "You're the linguist. Explain to me the grammar of love." "There is no grammar," Nancy said, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss. "Just improvisation and hoping you say the right thing." "Am I saying the right thing?" "Always." They made love slowly that night, learning each other in ways they'd been too rushed or too scared to explore before. Logan touched Nancy like she was precious, like she was everything. His hands reverent on her brown skin, his lips tracing poetry in a language only they spoke. Nancy gave herself over to it, to him, to the vulnerability and trust that came with really letting someone see you completely. Afterward, wrapped in sheets in each other, Nancy whispered in Korean, "Oman an kejashik. Arrogant bastard." Logan laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest where Nancy's head rested. "You promised to keep cursing me. Glad you're already following through. Someone has to keep you humble." "Is that what you call it?" Nancy propped herself up to look at him. "What would you call it?" "Love," Logan said simply. "You curse me because you love me, because you're not afraid of me, because you see me completely. The good, the bad, the complicated. And you choose me anyway." He tucked a strand of her natural hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "That's what love is, isn't it? Being seen and chosen anyway." "Yes," Nancy agreed softly. "That's exactly what it is." They fell asleep tangled together. Nancy's ring catching the moonlight through the window, their breathing syncing, their heartbeats finding the same rhythm. Years later, after Nancy had earned her doctorate and started the teaching position, while also running community programs through Logan's foundation, after Park Sung-min had passed peacefully in his sleep and left his empire to the grandson who'd transformed it, after they'd survived challenges and celebrated victories and built a life that was messy and beautiful and theirs, Nancy would look back on that night and realize something. She'd come to America to disappear, to become invisible, to survive, to make herself small enough that the world couldn't break her again. Instead, she'd met a man who demanded she be unforgettable, who saw her completely and chose her anyway, who loved her not despite her strength but because of it, and together they'd built something impossible. A love that existed in the spaces between languages and cultures and worlds, a love that refused to follow anyone else's rules. Nancy Wilson had cursed Logan Kwon Park in Korean, thinking it was rebellion. It turned out to be the beginning of everything. 10 years after that first meeting in the restaurant, Nancy stood in another garden, the rooftop where Logan had proposed, now maintained by the foundation as a community space. She was there to give a speech about linguistic preservation and immigrant communities, part of a program she'd designed. Logan sat in the front row with their daughter, 5 years old, already fluent in 3 languages. already learning to curse in Korean when she thought her parents weren't listening. She had Nancy's brown skin and Logan's dark eyes, and a personality that suggested she'd inherited both their stubbornness. During the Q&A, someone asked Nancy how she'd built such a successful career while also running community programs. Nancy smiled, caught Logan's eye. "I had help. I had a partner who believed I could do everything instead of just one thing. Who saw my ambition as an asset instead of a problem to manage. Who taught me that being seen completely, strengths and flaws and everything in between, is terrifying but necessary." After the speech, their daughter ran to Nancy, already chattering about the cookies she'd convinced Logan to buy her. Logan followed more slowly, that same smile he'd worn when Nancy had said yes to his proposal years ago. "You were brilliant," he said, pulling her close for a kiss that their daughter immediately protested with dramatic disgust. "You always say that." "I'm always right." Nancy laughed, that same bright sound that had first made Logan realize she was more than just a translator he could use. "Omenhan gejasik," she murmured. Logan's smile widened. "Repeat that. This time, look at me." And Nancy did, meeting his dark eyes with her own. This man who'd become her everything. This life they'd built together from impossible beginnings. "Omanan kejashik," she repeated clearly. "But you're my arrogant bastard." "Forever," Logan agreed. "Forever," Nancy echoed. And in a garden where two worlds bloomed together, where Korean hibiscus grew alongside Ghanaian orchids, where a woman who'd learned to disappear had finally learned to be unforgettable, they stood together. Seen, chosen, loved. Exactly as they were meant to be. Nancy Wilson had perfected the art of being invisible. Logan Kwan Park taught her that being seen was more dangerous, more terrifying, and infinitely more worth it. And together they proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is curse someone in a language they understand and love them anyway when they curse you back. The end was just the beginning. And it was spoken in 3 languages, sealed with promises kept, and written in the space between what was said and what was meant. Just like all the best love stories are.